Let's talk British politics now with Jonathan Haslam. He's the former Director of Communications for John Major when he was at Number 10, and he joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, look, let's talk first of all. I mean, the topic we're talking about an awful lot today is this new definition of Islamophobia that Angela Rayner is putting a council together with. The former Tory Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, is supposed to be heading this council to come up with an official government definition of Islamophobia. First of all, do we need a government definition of Islamophobia?
I'm very wary about this. I am very, very concerned about freedom of speech. I'm very wary, as a number of your callers have said, about the idea of splitting off sectors of British society and having special rules for them. Now, it is said that Rayner is also thinking about whether or not there should be a similar council on anti-Semitism. I mean, the plain fact is, as one of your callers said, we've got an Equality Act of 2010, and that should mean that we are all treated as equal citizens and respect each other's faiths and beliefs. And that seems to me a very strong place to start. Because the other aspect to this is that two aspects. First of all, we are concerned about an integrated society that has British values, whatever the colour of our skin, our caste, our religious beliefs or whatever. There should be something there which brings us all together. The other point that I'm really concerned about is the potential then to see an expansion of the thing that was being called Sharia law, which is actually the law which is imposed in Islam, and the extent to which that is treated within some communities as a substitute for British law. Yeah. That's wrong. If we're going to bring the societies together, stop treating people differently. We've got an Equality Act. Let's not play off one sector of society against another. And I have a great deal of respect for Dominic Grieve, very, very intelligent man and such like. I don't think he's actually been formally approached, which would be part of the argument for saying this is not properly thought out at this stage. Treat very, very carefully, because this has been going on for a long time. 2018, there was a committee headed by Wes Streeting that came up with some sort of a definition. And if you read that definition, it just seems to me that it's an open door for cancelling free speech and actually making things worse. That's not where we need to start from.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with that. What do you make of Trump and tariffs? And obviously we have these threats against Canada and Mexico now. Those tariff threats put on hold 25% tariffs in return for work at the border by both those countries to tackle not just illegal migration, but also fentanyl and other opioids coming into the US. But 10% tariffs on China, retaliation from China, threats they came into force this morning, threats against the EU. We've got Emmanuel Macron and others in Brussels yesterday at that meeting with Keir Starmer, basically, talking tough about, Europe would respond. We're told that Britain somehow might well escape these tariffs, but start we don't have a massive imbalance of trade with America, so that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. But also it appears that Donald Trump is getting on very well with Keir Starmer, I think, against all of our better expectations. But there's no doubt at all Britain can be caught up in a tariff war if it does happen across the Atlantic, or indeed with China, because of course it's going to affect a lot of the goods that we buy. What would you, if you were still in Number 10, what would you be recommending to your Prime Minister at that point to do?
Keep your head down at the moment. We're not in the crosshairs. Let's not make enemies on either side of the argument, because clearly the United States is a very, very important player. Donald Trump is using his economic might, to look at more than just trade matters. It's trade as a weapon for diplomacy. We've seen that with Mexico. We've seen it with the Canadians. Now, with the European Union, it's still a big market for us. And if we can improve relations and get easier trading arrangements, that would be very good news. But honestly, don't pick fights that you don't need to when you are likely to lose in any case. We're a small player, but we're a very open economy. We want free trade, and that's going to work to our benefit. Everybody's going to suffer if tariffs take over.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I tackled Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, about this morning, because they're very much pro-free trade in Reform UK, but apparently also pro-Donald Trump making tariff threats. Now, we're told about this, the balance of trade, but of course, when Canada and Mexico agreed to sort of put more troops on the borders to try and give more border control, then that then Donald Trump backs off. So it's clearly not about the balance of trade. Otherwise, he wouldn't have backed off, would he? But this is the thing. A lot of people in this country might be going, this isn't our problem. This is something that's happening over there, whether it's China or America or Europe. But we will be caught in the crosshairs. It will impact us. And tariffs are another word for a tax. It is a tax making goods that we buy from abroad more expensive.
And making them more expensive for American consumers as well. So it's not something that works in the long period of time. And I think that we've got to be really open about it. Yes, of course, we would all like to have a free trade arrangement with the United States, but we do need to know about the downsides. And the most obvious ones are often brought out. They are, do you want chlorinated chicken to come? Do you want to have beef stuffed full of various chemicals to make
already is?
And what's the impact on the British farming industry? So we need a wider debate. But let's, heaven's sake, I'll go back to it again, Julia, please. Don't pick fights that A, you can't win, and B, you don't need to be in. And for God's sake, we'll go back to my hobby horse, the Chagos Islands. Yes. That one's not off my agenda.
No, that's it.
You've heard it from me before.
Since you've raised it, I mean, we suddenly thought there was a deal was going to all be signed, sealed and delivered with the Mauritius government for us to hand over British territory to a country that has never owned it, who are in league with China for some reason, and then pay them for the privilege of doing so. We thought that was all going to be signed and sealed before Donald Trump got in, but clearly it's still on the table. Do you think it's going to go ahead or not?
I very much hope that we will get a sensible accommodation with the United States. We'll treat the Chagosians, who have been treated a bit roughly, better. We won't get into some devil's pact with the Mauritian government, because I don't think it works. And if Nick Thomas-Symonds is talking about utter pragmatism
the EU
with
minister.
the European Union, then that's fine. Let's have utter pragmatism elsewhere. Because what we've got here is, an international court headed by those bastions of freedom, Russia, China and Iran, telling us that we're bad boys.
I've got no time for any of these international courts, particularly after some of their rulings on Israel as well. Let me bring you back close to home, though. We did see last night a YouGov poll, the first sort of mainstream poll that has put Reform UK ahead, not just of the Tories, they've been ahead of the Tories quite a lot in recent weeks, but ahead even of Labour on 25 points, Labour on 24 points, Tories trailing behind on 21 points. Now, we've got a margin of error. They could all be mixed up, but the direction of travel is very clear. Reform going up, Tories going down, Labour certainly plummeting down since their victory last July. How worried should Kemi Badenoch, as a very new Tory leader, how worried should she be about Reform's rise in the polls? In particular, we know that Reform took a lot of Tory votes in July last year at the election, but also, according to this poll, even of those who voted Tory last July, a quarter of those are now saying they would vote Reform. How worried should she be?
She should be extremely worried. And where is Kemi Badenoch? I don't think I've heard much from her in the past few months, weeks, since she became leader. She's not at the moment out there fighting for the Conservative Party. And although really, we talk about margins of error, opinion polls at this time of a national nature don't matter. But one point. We've got local elections coming up. Are there going to be more local elections where Tory councillors are defecting and going to stand for Reform? It's going to be a fascinating contest. It'll tell us quite a lot about the direction of travel. But cautionary words, we've been here before. I can remember the 1980s and the SDP and how they flew very high in the polls. And even now, although you've seen the Brexit Party, the predecessor of Reform, do tremendously well in European elections, it didn't work nationally. Things have changed, of course, they have, but let's see to the real tests. Then we'll get a better idea of how high.
Certainly momentum of travel, but as you say, I mean, again, there's a very high bar. There's a point at which in the polls you need to get over for actually to deliver a big number of seats. Just finally, I want to ask you about Keir Starmer being criticised for possibly breaking COVID rules and lockdown rules back in December 2020. Remember, we were all told, no, we're not going to have a lockdown, but we're going into certainly the London and South East, millions and millions of people into Tier 4. You were banned from travelling from a lower tier into a higher tier. Pretty much people were told to stay at home. We're having another round. But Keir Starmer, for some reason, decided to get a voice coach, Leonie Mellinger, to visit his Labour London headquarters on Christmas Eve. to give him some advice before he made a statement on Boris Johnson's then Brexit deal. He's been accused of basically breaking those lockdown rules, that she was doing all of her other work online. She travelled by train between tiers. It wasn't clearly essential work. Some claims that she was somehow a key worker, as of course he was as a politician. Do you think he broke lockdown rules, and does it matter if he did?
Well, two things. There's several things. First of all, it's dubious whether or not he broke the law because he had it designated as essential worker. I can't get worked up about that. I can get worked up about the drip feed about his character. We've seen it with the gifts that he's taken, and that's bad news for him overall. Yep. The other thing is, what was the point? Anybody who heard the work from, let's go and turn the lights on in Regent Street knew that this lady actually hadn't done her job terribly well.
I mean, he definitely shouldn't have paid her, should he? Jonathan Haslam, thank you very much indeed, former Director of Communications at Number 10. I have to say, at the point this was happening, I was in Antigua on holiday. As was interesting. Having said, I didn't think we should lock down again, by the way, and arguing against it, and went totally legally, by the way. I was reported to the police by a few various people. And they're totally legal, along with everyone else on the plane. We went into Tier 4 while we were in the air. One Piers Morgan, interestingly, also went to Antigua that holiday, as I discovered while I was out there. We're quite well known, because he's always in Antigua. But interestingly, having told everybody, I don't see what the big deal is, we need to lock down for Christmas, and then went to Antigua on holiday.
No. All right.
Some of us aren't hypocrites about these things.
No.